When we were first putting a title on this section, we called it The Shadow of Desire, referring to Tennessee Williams' streetcar named Desire. Blanche Dubois in that play is an icon of a woman raised in patriarchy. She lives to please men. She takes her own value of herself by what they think of her. She is obsessed with knowing how she can allure men into what amounts to her trap. For that kind of woman, there is no way of working with the shadow until you recognize that it's the relationship to the Father that is driving her. She is continually being ambushed by that little girl's shadow. Just at the point where she seems to be standing up for herself, being the beautiful woman that she is, something comes in from underneath and cuts her off. She has to please Daddy or Daddy's surrogate. It would frighten her if she had to go in another direction and be who she actually is. So long as she is in the power of that shadow, she is not free. She's going to look for someone who can help her, someone who can put a projection on her to give her life, anything to escape living her own reality, which she can't find because the shadow is bigger than the ego. As Dr. von Franz says, excuse me, we cannot see our own backside. But if our ego could see it, it would find it contemptible. Because you see, we put out signs, unconscious signs. We don't even know we're putting those signs out. And we can see them in other people when they happen, and we can think, how can she do that? That's absolutely contemptible. But in ourselves, we either have to see it in projection or recognize it in the dreams and say, what is this? So to take that energy back, to recognize that this is the relation to the Father that is being lived out, is extremely important. The compounding difficulty is that this energy aligns itself with Mother Nature for the propagation of the race. And therefore it may not show up in a marriage until the children are 16, 17, 20 years old. Then the woman is able to be who she is. But so many women, I remember once a woman said to me, I squeezed the children's orange juice this morning. They just ran out the door. They didn't drink my orange juice. Who am I if they don't drink my orange juice? And she meant it. That's when you have to really deal with this shadow and work it through to the place where the energy can be who you really are. But you look at the energy with the Father. Was it sexual or was it spiritual? Now we move on to animus, the Latin word for spirit. It personifies the logos, the rational thinking function. If a woman is married to him in his dark aspect, that is, she may be married to him in fact, she may also be married to him within herself. probably both. It may make her rigid and opinionated. She thinks she knows everything. When she's alone, she thinks she knows nothing. Her aloneness feels like ice and glass to herself and to others, because her ideas are not her own. She has not bitten them off, chewed them, swallowed them, stomached them, digested them, and evacuated the waste. They are not part of her. And so there is an emptiness. She dreams that her teeth are falling out. We know these shadow figures well. We buy a new dress. We're going to a party. We look in the mirror. Not sure. Our partner or husband comes in and says, "Oh, what a beautiful dress, darling. How lovely. How lusciously buxom you are." And that's enough to get Neggy really going. Neggy? Who is Neggy? One has to have voices for these other little creatures inside. Neggy is the negative animus. And if you have a word like that, you could say, that is his voice, not mine, and I'm not going to be put down by it. If that voice gets going, it's the end of the party. Because when it's inner, it's far more subtle. It's amazing how the inner animus finds the exact person outside to reflect him. The inner problem has to be worked out in the relationship. Otherwise, we just go out to the same disaster to work it out in another place. Sooner or later, if you are going to mature, it has to be faced. You have to separate the voices in yourself. If we leave empty space within ourselves or outside, it can fill quickly with vampire energy. That figure can literally take hold of the neck, separate the head from the body, separate the feelings that are coming from the musculature, from the inner body, from the thinking. That ends in loss of soul. The woman experiences herself as having been raped. Sexuality, loathing, and rage belong together. She loathes the man who would make love to a slut. This is where the love of one woman for another is essential for healing. It is also where the Black Madonna can come into a dream with her great beating heart, take the dreamer on her lap, hold her close, and she can know that she can be herself, think how she wants to think, do what she wants to do, and be loved, because that's who she is. We have to remember that vampire creates vampire. Vampire movies are still very popular, and millionaire survivors are the competitors who can endure the most humiliation. Can anyone care about $1 million for that? Von von Franz has emphasized that the face that we turn to the unconscious is the face that is reflected back to us. In other words, if we are angry, we often get an angry response back from the unconscious. If we are diffident, the same kind of diffidence comes back to us. It's very important when we feel ourselves being chased by a demon that we stop and hold. Instead of running, some people run for a lifetime away from this thing that is running after them. If we can just stop and turn around and say, what do you want? Bring in all the strength you've got to say it, or to look this thing in the face. It's amazing how you may get an answer and it will tell you what it wants. It may say, I want to love you. I want to know you. I want you to know me. And the demonic may suddenly become its opposite. Remember those two energies that are in opposition, the contraries that make that huge energy once it starts to move. So to turn around and face that energy may be to turn the devil into Christ. Remember, Satan and Christ were half brothers. And Lucifer does mean morning star. Just to illustrate how alike and how different those two faces are, I want to tell you a story. I had been in analysis about a year, and I suddenly fell into a real despair. No seeming reason for it. But I cannot endure inner chaos. So I decided that I would find out what was wrong with me and figure out how to cure it. I got all the books I needed from the library, and I read day and night for a week. I figured out how all those complexes work, how they bang into each other, how they relate, and I knew what was wrong with me. And I went back to Dr. Bennett, full of joy, to tell him my great findings. And I talked for an hour, as fast as I could talk, and I saw that he was wilting in the chair, but the more he wilted, the faster I talked, and the more I ran over the very top of him. Not thinking, not realizing I was, not wanting to, but he was wilting. And I finally came to the end of my marvelous story with my great joy, realizing that there was some despair still simmering in the cellar. He helped me on with my coat. We went to the elevator. He turned to me and he said, Mrs. Woodman, if I were you, I would take my animus for a good drink. Now, on the surface, that was a creative thing to do. I did put my animus to work. I did the best I could to come out of the doldrums. But in the actual situation, I rolled over him like an army tank. I left no room to see him, to relate to him in the moment. I simply was consumed with my own energy. This is the tragedy of this kind of negative, I call it the demon lover, because it has the energy to be creative, a fiery spirit. But if it is not related, it is a killer spirit, not only outside, but inside. This is the energy that can move in anorexia, when what should be the life force, the presence that is holding, the love that is holding, giving other people a chance to open into their own being, when that is absent, that energy can lure a woman to her death. And we have been looking at the shadow side, the contrasexual side, and how to reconstruct those, all for the purpose of relationship. That is where we are moving in this series. Relationship is the most difficult. To be ourselves in relationship is most difficult. And I tell you, the longer I work at this analysis job, the more I wonder how men and women live on the same planet, let alone share the same home and the same bed. That is God's country. You have no idea what's going to happen there. What we are in now is a new vision of what relationship can be. And von Franz says, we have been through the liberation of sexuality. We are now moving in to the liberation of the heart.
After all said and done, what every human being really craves is simply to love and be loved. We've created artificial hearts and put men in the moon, but no one's ever figured out what makes a human relationship work. It should be easy. We've got single bars, computerized dating, sexual freedom. But there's not a day goes by when a psychoanalyst doesn't see a person with a lonely heart.
That can be interpreted in two ways. One can interpret it as relating to the fate of women, or relating it to the fate of the anima of a man. I take first the women. If a woman has this tendency of playing the anima to her father, father's little girl, and playing the anima, she assumes a divine role, because animus and anima are mythological, or in primitive language, divine figures, namely they belong to the dream world and not to outer reality. And therefore, a daughter who is flirting too much with her father and getting into a too close incestuous relationship with her father generally assumes, has a certain secret inflation. She assumes the dignity of a queen. She assumes that every man has to be at her feet like father, like she managed to bring forth with father. And she develops a certain haughtiness, feeling to be something special above the crowd. And therefore she becomes unapproachable to ordinary men. men who try to approach her feel she's a princess, but not somebody you can comfortably take into your bed and have an animal relationship with. You can relate to them, so to speak, only on a high level. And some girls who have that father's princess-like attitude, therefore, are in great danger not to marry or to have difficulties in relating to men.
In North America, many women are becoming involved in affairs, the basic requirement being that there's no feelings involved. If feelings become involved either way, then it's over. They seem to want unrelated sexuality. How do you see this?
I think it has two roots. One, the deeper root is that many North American women are very unhappy, basically because of the whole way of the social life in North America. It is not enough rooted. People move too much about. Women have very little chance to establish roots to the earth, to a garden, to a house, to a community, to a surrounding where they can stay. It is this constant moving which rather pleases men, but is very unfortunate for women. And that damages the women's instinctuality, and then they want to replace it by sex, because that is then, so to speak, the last possibility to have something to do with their own body or to confirm their own physical existence. But it's a desperate move which is a surrogate for something quite different, a surrogate for having no feminine life, no feminine rhythm of life. The whole rhythm of the North American life is too hectic for a woman. It's not, it damages women more than men. It's not good for men either, but it damages women even more. And then there is this whole world of advertising and this whole social idea of success, and girls having to date boys and inquiring in, are you dating a boy already, and so on. And it is all, so the whole relationship between the sexes becomes an affair of success, of social achievement, instead of feeling. And if a woman has not a strong relationship to her own instinctual feminine nature, then she falls for that kind of nonsense. Women can run sex with the head, so to speak, completely cool, without feeling, as a means to confirm their self-esteem. I must have a man, I must have an affair in order to prove myself to be normal, and because one should have that, because it is a success to have a man in one's pocket. But it has nothing to do with the instinctual, real feelings of a woman. She overruns those with a theoretical idea of having to have a man and having to have sex. And then the whole thing is a cold power game which leads to nothing. And then she runs a success life with trying to conquer men and putting them in her pocket and boasting to her girlfriends about it. And it has nothing to do anymore with her real feminine feelings.
Would you elaborate on the fact that they want sex without feeling? No emotional commitment either way.
Because when there is an emotional commitment, there is at once conflict. And then one is easily hurt. If one is emotionally and committed with one's feeling to a human being, then one risks a lot of misunderstandings and hurts, because even the best partner will hurt you from time to time. You are exposed, you are vulnerable, you are dependent. And such women don't want to go into that. They are afraid of it. They are afraid of the complications of the heart, so to speak. And they prefer to run it like a cold businessman. Just have the pleasure of it and goodbye. Nothing to do with you personally. Because it is also a rejection of the feminine fate, because it has always been the fate of women to be personally interested in the man and to be therefore vulnerable. And what about losing your partner? What about your partner going away with another woman? What about your partner traveling for years in foreign countries and not returning to you? That is the eternal pain of women, because women want a lasting personal relationship, and men very often do not care about it, or have a life, or lead a life where they cannot care about it too much. They have to attend their own business. And that is a tragedy between men and women. And such women who don't want personal commitment want to escape that tragedy. They want to escape suffering, and they get into much worse suffering naturally.
When you talk about the instinct, you're not talking about sexuality per se.
The sexual instinct is one instinct, but there are many other instincts as well. There's the instinct of self-preservation, and there are social instincts and aggressive instincts. There's a whole host of different instincts, and the animal represents the totality of the instinctual world. An animal never consists only of sexual desires. A dog, for instance, those Dobermans, they have aggression, they have the need for food, they have the need for affection, they have the need for being with other dogs, and so on and on. And so if a woman singles out the sexual instinct as the only instinct and runs it with her head, then it is contra-instinctual, because it's out of balance. It's choosing one instinct against all the others, which nature never does. Nature keeps a kind of homeostasis or general equilibrium between the instincts, and turns one instinct on and then the other off and on and off again. If we observe animal life, it's periodical. There are periods of for the sexual instinct, there are situations for the aggressive instinct, there are situations of the collective herd instinct, and so on. And those rhythms are regulated by totality, by the wholeness of the being. So only man is stupid enough that he can pick out one instinct and perform only that one instinctual performance, and then naturally that is against the wholeness of the instinctual world, and then he does harm to his own body and to his whole life.
But women's liberation would say that unrelated sexuality is an achievement. Women can do now on a large scale sexually what men have been doing for centuries.
Well, I think that as far as there are still Victorian prudishness around, that is a good idea, but it is the least of the problem, because I would say that is now achieved in our modern world. A woman can live her sexual life as she likes, and so that is no longer the problem. Now comes the much bigger problem, namely a liberation of the heart. That is what that's the program of the next 50 years.
Liberation of the heart.
There are two possibilities of human connection. The one is technical, by the boss and the employee, the bus conductor and the passenger, and so on, and that is organized by rules, and even organized nowadays by psychological rules. There are training programs for managers, how they manage the employees and so on, and that is all rationalized. And the one thing which is always left out is the liking and the disliking, and the feeling reaction. For instance, what does not count, a woman would sometimes like to say, this sounds all very logical, but I have a strong feeling against it. No, nobody would put any attention to that nowadays. If she cannot formulate it as a logical deduction, just to say my feeling tells me, my feeling instinct tells me this is no good, then one just ignores it, one walks over her. And men do the same thing. Men have feelings too, but they ignore them. They think, they have a funny feeling in their stomach and they think, oh, that is a jet lag or something, and they rationalize it away. They don't listen to the reactions of the heart. And that's what so many so-called primitive people or so-called underdeveloped countries, people of underdeveloped countries, reproach us, quite rightly, because whatever their shortcomings are, they listen more to those feelings. To Australian Aborigine, you could still say, today I have a bad feeling, I won't move out of the camp. Or that fellow seems to make a very good offer to us, but I somehow don't like him, and therefore I'll keep away from him. That you can tell still to an Australian Aborigine, but if you say that to a white American businessman, he'll just think, oh, well, women.
On Valentine's Day, little Eros takes out his bow and arrow and dusts it off and flies around and fires into our hearts. And our hearts get lonely and they get sore and hearts can break. Have we built in our society a wall of rationality that his arrows can't penetrate? Are we in danger of losing our capacity to love and be loved?
I think that is the great problem number one of the Aquarian age, that the only thing which might save us from falling in the East and the West into a rationally over-organized mass society in which the individual is suffocated. And we have those slogans now in politics, too much state, too much organization, and so on. So people are waking up to the fact of what is negative, that the computerizing of humanity, that having too many rules, rules are always impersonal, or they are for everybody. Everybody has to keep the rules and so on. All that massification which comes from the fact of overpopulation. It's not our fault. The overpopulation demands this organization. But that suffocates the individual. While if you study primitive communities or older agricultural communities, everybody knew everybody and knew everybody personally and related to each other personally. For instance, a lot of idiots and mentally sick people didn't need to be internalized because the community just suffered them. They laughed and they said, oh, well, you know, so and so. I even remember in a village I grew up, the first day we moved in, a man came and said, my father is a kleptoman and he steals everything. So if things are stolen from you, please don't go to the police, just come to me and I'll hand them back to you. So you see, the poor old man, kleptoman, didn't need to go to an asylum. Everybody knew his little fault and corrected it. That is personal relationship. He belonged personally to the community, including his faults. And such a society can, there are less criminals and there are less people ready for the lunatic asylums. Such a community can carry the individual or stand the individual and leave it a certain leeway of freedom with a kind of shrug of shoulder, oh, well, he is like that or she is like that, in a pardoning shrug of the shoulders. People are taken for what they are, and that's what we have lost, and that's what we have to restore again in some new form.
Jung said that it's easier to be better than we are than simply what we are. In a relationship, we try so hard to please the person that we love, and we feel so hurt when they aren't exactly what we want them to be. But relationships based on need fulfillment are rooted in power, and they merely enslave. Following the way of the dream leads to a different mode of relationship, a radically different form of love. Dr. von Franz, we said earlier that a man with the mother complex fantasizes on an ideal woman who will fulfill his fantasies, gratify all his infantile desires. He wants a girl just like the girl that married dear old dad. How does that mother complex affect his personal relationships with a woman?
When a man has a mother complex, he's generally a split anima. Namely, on one side, his feminine side is, he worships the feminine image too much. It's a kind of Virgin Mary or feminine Holy Ghost figure, the pure, wonderful woman, so to speak. And the other is the prostitute, with whom he has sex, but whom he thoroughly despises. This kind of split in the anima between the Virgin Mary and the prostitute is typical for the mother complex. And such men then, if they have to approach a woman, they don't know how to do it, because the one they admire too much, she's too pure, you can't stretch out your hand and touch her, and the other is easily conquered, but no partner really, just something to have sex with. And such men have also in their own way trouble to relate to women because of that split anima situation.
Is promiscuity in a male connected with this split?
I think the promiscuity has to do with something else. It's simply that the conventional Christian barriers have been pulled down, and the young generation now is experimenting with sex all over the place. And you meet among those men and young women who are promiscuous all sorts of constellations, mother complex, father complex, all sorts of it's a more general factor, this experimenting nowadays, because the Christian barriers against sex have been pulled down. But then in the individual case, such a man would, for instance, date a girl who has a huge father complex and is therefore unapproachable, or a Rapunzel who is unapproachable in a tower, and always hesitate to go closer to her, or would even try to go to bed with her and not succeed. And he would still be attached to that girl and have cheap sexual affairs on the other side, which do not satisfy him. That would be the situation in such a man.
He would be very unfulfilled. I'd like to talk more about your idea of liberation of the heart, differentiating it from sexual liberation.
Well, feeling is my inferior function, so I have certain trouble to articulate that. But the feeling function is something which is completely neglected nowadays. Now, generally, we identify feeling with affect and emotion, but that is only inferior feelings. For instance, in the happenings of young people, musical happenings, they liberate their feelings, but it mostly comes out in strong emotions, and it comes out as a feeling of loving everybody or destroying everything in a kind of all over the place way, not individually pointed, while differentiated feeling is to love that unique person for its uniqueness, which presupposes that you are capable of seeing the uniqueness of the other, of getting rid of all schematic psychological judgments, of being able to, it is ultimately something irrational and has to do with one's own development. The more one becomes a unique individual oneself, the more one individuates in the Jungian sense of the word, the more one becomes only able to also see the other person as a unique person and not have some cliché judgment about them. If you listen to how people gossip about each other, you can notice that 80% of what they say about the other person is a cliché slogan and does not hit the uniqueness of that person. It doesn't define the uniqueness. So liberation of the heart would mean to become slowly capable of feeling and sensing the uniqueness of the other's personality and to love that uniqueness. And that doesn't mean this Christian all-pardoning, sweetie pie, strawberry sauce love, of just all loving and pardoning everything. It means, on the contrary, a very great precision of feeling, namely to... I noticed that people with differentiated feeling, if one talks to them in a not quite genuine tone or makes even a not quite genuine gesture of the hand, they are already shocked. They feel the uniqueness and they want you to be yourself. I think that's the most important thing for a psychologist, for instance, to love the genuine person of the patient and to be quite openly disliking all what is not genuine in the patient. Then it brings out the other. It brings out in the other what he or she really is, or is really meant to be by nature. And that is real love, to love, a love which heals or makes the other person whole, which makes the other person more him or herself. And that has nothing to do with sentimentality or being just sweet or polite.
Exactly the opposite.
Exactly the opposite. It's very tiring. It's having constantly a quick, precise reaction to how the other really is, or is not, or should be. You have sometimes in the anecdotes of Zen masters, you find such things that a novice comes with an ungenuine answer, or with a tricky intellectual question, and the Zen master just hits him in the core of his real being.
Can you think of one of those off the top of your head?
There was once a novice came in, and the master said, "Look in the stove if there is still some fire under the amber." And the novice looked and said, "There's no fire under the amber." And he gave him a hit over the head and said, "There is fire under the amber." And in that moment the novice woke up.
Is there anything a man can do when he's attacked by woman's animus?
A man could just talk with her reasonably, but a man just generally gets irritated, and then he can't talk to her reasonably anymore. When she kind of, in a childish, plaintive, reproachful voice, reproaches him all the time that he is guilty for all her misery, then he having weak feeling feels awkward and gets irritated, either doesn't answer or slams the doors or picks up the newspaper and doesn't answer or turns on the television and sulks, and then she gets wilder and wilder.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this is more common now than in the past?
No, I think it only comes more to the surface. Women are great masters in keeping things hidden if they want to, and in societies where women are not allowed to rebel, they just swallow it all down and turn sour and bitter. And with us now it's allowed to rebel, and therefore it comes out more. Generally the man, if the woman attacks him with the animus, feels helpless and has a helpless, vague feeling that if he only could return her into the role of a woman, she would be right. And that's what gives him the impulse to just grab her, put her on the bed and say, now you are a woman, don't be a man. He expresses by that, be a woman, you are my wife, you are not a man. And that's what gives him that impulse. It helps sometimes. The German word for convincing somebody is überzeugen, to overgenerate the other. And one can sometimes convince the animus that way. I've known quite often the husband just grabbing his wife and saying, now come on, stop all babbling all that nonsense, and putting her right in the feminine position.
So you believe there's a place for male dominance in a relationship?
Yes, naturally. There's a place for a man to be a man and a woman to be a woman. Otherwise, nature has made them that way. It doesn't need to have an attitude of dominance. You can just as well say, make love to her. It's just as much an expression of love. So you can say, a man can sometimes break the animus possession of his wife by making love to her. It all depends how he does it. If he has real feelings, it'll reach her. If he acts that way, nothing happens. It only goes wrong. That's why I never advise when I analyze a man to do such a thing, because then he would do it acting. He would act it because I told him, and then it would certainly go wrong. It only goes right if he really has a positive feeling, a wave of positive, warm feeling towards her.
Yes, but when the woman's crying and saying, how can you do this to me, and if you do this, I'm going to leave you, is he supposed to... He's got to sympathize and understand her.
He has not to take all that bullshit, because it'll only get worse and worse and worse. But he has to, therefore he has to refuse all that nonsense and say, when you talk in that whiny baby way to me, all sorts of nonsense, I'm not even going to listen. But he must at the same time make a gesture that the woman feels, if only she were herself, he would love her. For a man to deal with an animus-possessed woman is to love, to give a hand to the woman to say, I love you, I still love you, and to slap the animus at the same time. So that the woman feels, when I'm myself, he still loves me. When I'm not myself, he gets angry. And by that, the man can help the woman out. Then she begins to notice what is herself and what is not herself. We will see it's the same thing with the anima of a man.
You disagree with the woman's lib position. You're saying that the woman should just give way to the man. Let the man run it his way. Woman just sits back and suffers.
Yeah, but she can do also what she likes, and men have to suffer. I feel there is mutual freedom. Married couples should give each other more mutual freedom and more mutual understanding. So there will come moments where I will remind the husband, you know, I convinced your wife not to put anything in your way when you did that, but now you must not put anything in her way when she does that.
Apparently we freed ourselves sexually in this society. We're liberated from Victorian prudishness. But affairs are still breaking hearts and causing a lot of disruption in marriages. What role does the complex play in an affair?
Well, you think, for instance, of a wife and she learns that her husband has an affair. Then her feminine feeling and her personal feelings are deeply hurt. And if she would react in a feminine way, she would dramatically express to her husband that she is hurt. Instead of that, the animus, who is the masculine side, said, such a thing cannot go on. We must either divorce or he must stop this affair. So you must set him a time. He must give up till the end of next month. This affair must be finished or not. You see there, this is talking like a lawyer. This is not talking like a woman. And if she doesn't even feel that way, her men friend and her woman friend will tell her, you must tell your husband that. And then she sails and she goes and she tells her husband, look here, this has to stop, this can't go on forever, I can't stand it, you have to make up your mind, da 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 da, talks like a lawyer. Now the husband only vaguely feels, this isn't my wife, this is a lawyer speaking to me. And so he explodes or gets sulky, or men very often, when the women come as a man, they become women, then they sneak out or they begin to lie. And that infuriates her even more, and then you have the classical marriage battle, which is all over the world, the same from China till Canada. You could make a cliche of it, and it's always the same exchange of words. But the woman doesn't notice that she doesn't express her feelings. She thinks she expresses what she thinks is true, is her true opinion. But if you look at it, the sentence generally begins with, one cannot do that, one cannot. It's generally a general impersonal cliche. Such a situation cannot be carried on. One cannot behave like that. Such situations always end like that, instead of having an individual feeling reaction.
Well, what can the woman do then?
There is no general rule. She has to follow her own feeling. It depends on what kind of an affair her husband has, if she feels he needs that, or if she feels he's running into a disaster and she ought to prevent him if possible. It depends on 1,000 details, and that's why one cannot give a general recipe.
Most women would say they don't have to put up with that stuff.
That's normally an animus, because it's a general opinion. I have not, one has not, being a married woman, one has not to put up with that stuff. That's a general opinion, and that does not take into account the specific situation. For instance, the poor husband might have not wanted to fall in love at all. He fell into it against his own will. So why should the woman then be furious with him? She should rather look at him as being sick. If he has the flu, she nurses him, and if he has love flu, she won't put up with it. Feeling, if the woman stays with her feeling, then she can see the whole personal implications, and she can see the whole situation in a very personal and differentiated way. And then she generally can find the wisdom to handle it somehow. While if she falls into the animus, then she goes along with collective rules which make the man feel not to be understood anymore.
Most relationships begin by two people falling in love. They meet their other half, their soulmate, so to speak. What happens when that projection is withdrawn? Is the relationship over?
One cannot say that ahead. Generally, when people fall in love like that in 1 second, it is mostly projection, and many marriages are concluded on the basis of complete projection. And then comes, therefore, generally a period of disillusionment where both partners discover that he or she are very different from what they had thought they were. And then comes the great test. Can they now build up a real relationship after the projection has gone, or is nothing left? After the projection is gone, there's nothing left. There are two strangers staring at each other's face and saying to themselves, how could I? That one can only decide on the dreams. I've very often analyzed couples where, after having worked through the animus anima projections, one or both partners dreamt that now they could get married, and they dreamt of a real going to church and having a marriage ceremony and getting married at last. As if one could say the removing of the projection has made it possible to be really related. This time for good. No, with open eyes, saying yes to each other with open eyes and knowing each other. While before that was a kind of blind infatuation.
In our society, we make the most important decision of our life based on blind infatuation.
Well, I think it's the best possible thing, because otherwise, historically, it's the families who have arranged marriages for money reasons and power reasons and family politic reasons, as it's still partly done in India and has been in good families in China and so on. And that isn't very favorable either. Then I would say rather let fate play. And then it is projection, and in many cases, if the people are instinctually healthy, they do not only project, they have a healthy instinct choosing the right partner. And if there is not a father image or a mother image disturbing the situation. And then I can say, even if it goes wrong, then they have learned something. And if you had prevented them, they wouldn't have learned anything. They would have remained blind puppies. So I think projections and error and possible divorces, sometimes a detour which cannot be avoided. It's tragic and very sad, but we are now, for the first time in history of mankind, experimenting with free love, because in tribal, primitive tribes, it is all tribal arrangement or family arrangement, and has mostly a status background or a background of distributing the possessions and so on. Marriage has nothing to do with love, originally as an institution. And we can't do that anymore. It's too impersonal, it's too collective. So if we want to find personal relationship, we have to experiment ourselves. And I think we will have to go through a lot of painful suffering, and men torturing women and women torturing men, till we wake up to a possibility of relating better to each other. It's a unique experiment in history. It's begun with the cour d'amour in France, when the knights could choose a woman they loved and serve, and where they had free love relationships in Western civilization. But promptly the Catholic Church has repressed it again. There were too many illegitimate children and family complications and inherited problems. So the legalizing tendency of man has suppressed it again. I always say to my people when they are in difficulties, I say, this is pioneering country where you are now. We for the first time in history, we try out to really relate men and women on a human basis. And there is bound to be a lot of error and trouble first. The modern developments of psychology don't want to abolish marriage, but they want to make it a bit less tight, less tyrannically tight, especially when the children gets older. Young children need a close, tightly family life, and therefore generally the biological drives knit couples together in the early part of their marriage. But after a certain while it is important and it has probably a social motivation. If the community consists of all little happy, tightly knit families, then there is no general communal life. They are all little packages, not relating to each other, only saying my children are better than your children, so to speak. While therefore, when the children get older, there is generally a tendency of the unconscious to not dissolve marriage, but to loosen its to demand more freedom for both partners. So I am for a certain freedom for the men, but just as much for the women.
And fidelity?
Well, the question is fidelity what the law decides, namely that you may not go to bed with another partner, which might mean nothing. Jung said you can commit adultery sometimes by just looking into somebody's eyes. lovingly. And that might mean more than having a bed affair, which means nothing. So what is adultery? What is fidelity? Fidelity is, I think, has to be something not so defined in a purely outer way. It is a kind of, to me, fidelity is a basic loyalty to the essence of the other person. A loyalty without compromise to the innermost heart of the other, of the partner. But that doesn't exclude that one takes a certain freedom and leaves the other to have a certain freedom. On the contrary, if one loves the other really, one wants him to be free. One wants not to put him on a leash like a dog.
And now we are arriving at the source, what Jung calls the self. The energies that have been coming together throughout this whole program and are held at that core. The divine feminine, the divine masculine in the inner marriage. This is not to say that the energy is static. Indeed, the images of the inner core keep shifting, but the essence is the same.
Dreams tell us two things: where our energy is and where it wants to go. Night after night, over 100,000 during the course of a lifetime. If we look at dreams over a long period of time, we begin to see meaningful connections between them. Dr. von Franz, in your work as an analyst, have you observed an overall pattern in the dream life of an individual?
There is still a lot of study to be done that hasn't been investigated enough. But I have noted my dreams now for 40 years, and I have some of my analysants who have taken down their dreams regularly over years, so that we have an overall look of, let's say, 3,000 dreams. I have here also left from a patient who died about 3,800 dreams. He was a very conscientious noter of dreams. He wrote every dream down. And there you see that it is like making a plait. It is one motif comes, appears and reappears. There is something periodical about it. One of my analysants, for instance, picked out themes of his dreams. The theme of fighting, the theme of the father, the theme of, he was a sportsman of sports, the theme of his main problems, so to speak. And then he noted that they are always coming up, redisappearing, coming up, redisappearing. And one can, if one follows up one strand, one sees how the father problem or the problem of doing sports or something slowly changes through it, as if there's a slow, gradual change. That's why people are very often discouraged and say, I'm still dreaming about father shouting at me. That's a dream I've had at the beginning of my analysis. I haven't developed at all. But I always say, wait a minute, if we look at it very closely, if we follow up all the dreams you had about your father, you will see there is a slight change. The change is very gradual. But it is as if something in the depth of the person was cooking the theme and sending up messages from time to time, and you slowly see that there is a ripening of the problem. For instance, a negative father figure becomes more and more amenable, appears less dangerous, or something like that. Or you have a danger situation which occurs already in the beginning dreams, and it occurs again in later dreams, but in later dreams there's a solution to it. There's a little continuation which ends better. So as if nature would slowly brood on those problems and slowly develop them. And that's the whole idea of dream interpretation. By interpreting dream, by joining in with the conscious attention, one can speed up that maturing. There is a kind of natural maturing process, or a natural process of working out problems. And analysis is nothing else than to concentrate conscious attention on that natural maturing process so that it is speeded up. As if you would add fire to it, you would add attention to it, and then it goes faster.
Our conscious life seems to go through definite stages of development, childhood, adolescence, etc. Do dreams show a parallel development?
There is an essential difference between the dreams of very young people and of aging people. And in the middle of life there is a transition stage where it's mixed up. But you can say that in general, in very young people, the dreams try to help them to adapt to life. There's an outward moving towards adaptation of life to fulfill the love life, the personal ambition, the ego identity of and all these goals of the first half of life. And then the more people are aging after 35, 40 years old, there is an adaptation towards the inner life, finding one's own meaning of life. But nowadays even that becomes sometimes urgent with young people. We are so crushed by the mass-mindedness of our civilizations due to the problem of overpopulation. Everybody feels superfluous. Everybody feels if I would be removed to the cemetery, that would change nothing in the whole reality. Mankind would just teem on this planet, and there would be just one less who eats the food, and that would be really a blessing. So the mass-mindedness and our whole situation crushes us and makes us feel superfluous and unimportant. In our professional life, we can always be replaced by 20 others who want the same post. There's a bustling around about having the same position. And that has a very destructive effect on modern man. Either he compensates it by becoming ambitious and megalomanic and wanting to be the top dog to at least achieve something, or he feels completely crushed and superfluous, and there's a kind of sneaky depression coming up in him. And that sneaky depression you find, for instance, nowadays in many young people. They are kind of in a hidden way deeply depressed and discouraged. They don't believe in their own life and in the meaning of their own existence. Now all the dreams center around pointing out to the individual the unique meaning of its unique life. And that is perhaps the most important aspect of dream life. It is as if you can say in a forest there are 2,000 trees, but if you look at it closer and accurately, every tree is a personality. Not two trees are the same. They are all personalities. And nature becomes real or fulfills its patterns in unique individuated beings. That's why statistical thinking is so detrimental, so harmful. We say in this heap there are stones of 1 kilo of weight, but if you look at the stone heap itself, there's not one stone which is 1 kilo. One is 2 kilos and one is a half kilo and so on. And we have to learn again to look at the uniqueness of the real thing. Reality consists of an enormous amount of unique beings, and dreams help us to find the unique pattern of our life. That's why one of the most frequent complaints in modern psychological practice is that people say, my life has no meaning. And they shrug their shoulders, they say, my life has no meaning. What for? What am I there for? What's the use of it all? I could just as well not exist. And there the dream are a unique help to point out what the unconscious wants of that person, namely what it wants that person to become. And that's often very surprising. I try sometimes to guess when some people comes to me. You see, what will come out of them? Is that a creative problem, or will that girl who is so unhappily in love get her Jack or John, or will, and so on. I never guess right. It's always a complete surprise what comes out of it. But after the event, you see, that is now uniquely the solution for that person. That's not a collective solution. That's why we feel sometimes very discouraged in publishing case material, because people think, that's the solution of a depressive problem, or that's the solution of an unhappy marriage problem, or so on. It isn't. It is only the solution for that person, of that case, and in another case it's different. That's why it's even dangerous to publish case material, in a way, because people identify and think it's their solution, and it's not their solution. It's that other person's solution. It's every time surprising and unique, and that makes the work on dreams so exciting, because it never repeats. And you can never guess. It's always a creative answer of nature.
Dr. von Franz, do you believe in predestination? Do dreams show that life is in fact predetermined?
I think the theological idea of predestination is based on a feeling that there is a pre-existing pattern, and there is naturally a lot of a human life has a pre-existing pattern. If you only think of the fact that you are born as a man or a woman, and that you are born as a white man or a Chinese man, or that you are born in this place and not in another place, and that you are born in this family and not in another, there is already a lot is predestined through that. There is a given pattern. But there is also a certain leeway of freedom. Otherwise there would be no therapy. Otherwise we could give up therapy and say people have to fulfill the pattern of their life anyhow, so what? You can't change it. And that's not true. By making the pattern, by reading the pattern through the dreams and making them conscious, we can give it certain turns. We can, in a way, not escape our fate, but we can give it a more positive turn. It makes a difference if we say yes to our fate and fulfill it positively, as if we are resisting it and dragged to it. And so we can say there is a certain predestination, but it's not absolute. It's not like the fatalistic idea of Allah has decided it and it'll just go that way. We can, and that's why therapy has a meaning. We can, by understanding the pattern of our life, change it a bit and avoid certain negative consequences of it. Give it a relatively more positive aspect.
And is there such a thing as a death dream? Do dreams announce death?
I have now just started a study on dreams, last dreams of people before they enter the coma. And the dreams of dying people are not about death, but generally about either a journey. They have to get ready for a journey, or they have to go through a dark tunnel and be reborn into another world, or they have to go through a disagreeable darkness or dark cloud to come out in another space, or they are going to finally meet their beloved partner. That's the famous motif of the death as a marriage with one's own other inner half. Or they dream about when they are worried, when they are strongly identified with their body and therefore inclined to think that when the body is finished, everything is finished. Then they have dreams which try to detach them from the body. I remember, for instance, a dream of a man who dreamt just before he died, he was a cavalrist, that his soldier came and said, officer, look at what I have to show you. And he showed him the decaying corpse of his horse. Jung interpreted that it was saying, the warm-blooded animal which you are is going to die. That's what's going to happen to it. But it's not you. It's only the warm-blooded animal body which is going to decay, but not you yourself. Because he was looking at the corpse of the horse. He was still there. So the dreams of dying people show a tremendous variety, which generally they are the same archetypal motif which comparative ethnology has found out about death rituals and death beliefs of life after death in the different human populations. That it is a rebirth, that it is a long, long journey into another country, that it is a transformation, that it is a partial destruction, but something survives, and so on. There are very many motifs.
Earlier you told me a dream of a dying woman.
Well, that was a very simple woman, and she told the nurse in the morning after breakfast, tonight I had a strange dream. I dreamt that there was a candle on the windowsill, and it was slowly burning down, and it began to flicker. And I had a panic, and I thought, my God, now the great darkness is coming, the great darkness is coming. And then suddenly there was a change, and the candle was outside the windowsill on the outer part of the window, and was big and burning quietly again. Isn't that a strange dream? 4 hours after that dream, she died. The dream seems to tell her, yes, the candle of your light is flickering, it's going out, but it will continue in another medium. Beyond a certain threshold, the window would be an isolating threshold. It is going on in another sphere. That very same life is going on. She was very comforted by the dream without understanding it. And that is a typical dream of a dying person. You have many such dreams. For instance, I remember another dream which has been published by a medical doctor of a man who dreamt that he saw an abyss, and at the border of the abyss was growing a big tree, and the tree was slowly losing its roots and having its roots in mid-air. And suddenly there was an earthquake, and the tree was falling down. And he thought, that's the end. And at that moment, the tree began to hover in mid-air and to continue to exist in mid-air without having roots in the earth, just growing on. As if the unconscious would say, your tree of life is losing only its contact with earthly reality, but it's not dying. It's growing on. The life process is going on in another medium. And that's the gist of most dreams of dying people. That's why it is very worthwhile to continue analysis with dying people. Many psychological schools don't bother anymore about old or dying people because they think they have nothing to adapt to life anymore. What about sex problems? When you are on your deathbed, it's no longer something you can deal with. But you can see that the voice of nature, or the voice of instinct, which are the dream, help the people to die in peace. and to comfort them. Many people to whom I told such dreams objected that is wishful thinking. The dreams are wish fulfillments, but I don't believe it, because as you see from the dream of the decaying horse, the nature does say the end is coming. So quite unsentimentally, and the candle, the flickering candle does go out in that old woman's dream. But at the same time it says, yes, something is coming to an end, but there's something in another medium going on. It's very difficult to imagine how and what, but we can only take it as such.
Are there dreams that say a person is actually going to die?
Till they are actually dead, you are never quite sure. Because once I had, for instance, the experience of a woman who consulted me, and she had cancer everywhere, all metastases all over the body. And she had shocking death dreams. She dreamt that her watch was stopped, and she brought it to the watchmaker, and he said it can't be repaired anymore. She saw her favorite tree felled in the garden, and it was gone. And I didn't even interpret the dreams to her. She said to me sadly, that clearly says the outcome of my illness. While the doctors told her, you will be better and it'll be all right and so on, in the usual way. But she was sure. She had a terrible shock from that and pulled up her sock and faced her problem. She had a problem she hadn't faced. And I can only say she's still alive after 15 years. So she had death dreams to give her a death shock. But it was like that. She could have died and she could have not died. She chose to, out of shock, she chose to live. And that's why, since I have experienced that, I would say even if people have death dreams, it might only mean that they should face death. It doesn't mean that it will actually happen. But it certainly means they must face it. They must come to a naked confrontation with the fact that their life might come to an end. But if that can give them a salutary shock and they continue to live, or if it actually means now it is finished, that I would never dare to say before the end has come. But there is sometimes a kind of uncanny smell around certain dreams where one has the feeling that forebodes death. But that's more a parapsychological, mediumistic feeling one has about it. Scientifically, I couldn't give any reasons why that dream means actual death and the other means only the problem of death. There's sometimes one gets a gruesome shiver when people tell you a death dream, and then it's as if your nervous sympathetic system would say, watch out. This really means death.
Based on your experience of dreams, do you believe in life after death?
I wouldn't say I believe in it. That is a bit too strong. I would say it seems to me from the dreams that there is a life after death. And because I think that dreams do not cheat and are not wish fulfillment, there must be something going on. There must be an aspect of life or the psyche going on. The worrying thing about it, which I would not, the question I would not dare to answer univocally is, does life go on impersonally, or does the personal ego, what you feel is your individual identity going on? There are contradictory documents in that way. For instance, if you take the dream of that tree, you can say, yes, the life process of that man is going on, but not his ego. He himself is no longer around. On the contrary, there are other dreams which point to the fact that even the conscious identity goes on. So that is, to me, an open question.
This is a question that's puzzled me for a long time. If dreams come from a source that is trying to guide our lives and is so interested in giving us direction, then why does the dream maker talk in Chinese?
That has puzzled me too, and I have reproachfully asked him, why does this goddamn unconscious talk in such a Chinese difficult language? Why doesn't it tell us clearly right out what's the matter? Now, Jung's answer was, it obviously can't. It doesn't speak the language of the rational mind. The rational mind is one thing, and the dreams are the voice of the instinctual animal nature in man. Or even, ultimately, that's a very daring hypothesis, but I'll venture it. The collective unconscious and anorganic atomic matter is probably two aspects of the same thing. So the dreams are ultimately the voice of cosmic matter in us. And therefore, just as we cannot understand the behaving of atoms and look at the Chinese language modern physicists have to use to describe the behavior of an electron, we have to use the same kind of Chinese language to describe the deeper layers of the dream world. It leads deep into the mysteries of natures, which is strange to our rational mind. You can best compare it simply to atom physics, where the most complicated formulas are not sufficient to describe what is really happening. And why that is so, why nature has constructed our rational mind, our cortical brain, functioning in a way that we cannot understand the whole of nature, I don't know. We are born with a brain which seemingly can only understand certain aspects of nature. Perhaps there will be later mutations on another planet.
We arrive one night, to our amazement, at a dream such as we never had before. It just shocks us because it is full of new images, new vision, and it's saying, this was okay this far. Now we're moving in a whole new dimension. And the images from that point on radically shift. Such a dream you will hear in the last program, a dream on how to interpret a dream.
Throughout this series, we've been seeing how dreams act as an inner guide if we establish a dialogue with them. Here's an amazing dream that reveals the nature of the dream itself. It actually tells how to interpret a dream. I had this dream when I was studying to be an analyst. The night before, a friend and I had sat till maybe 3 o'clock in the morning discussing the problem of interpreting other people's dreams. It was the first time in my life I ever attempted to interpret another person's dream. And I was pretty worried about it. That night, I had this dream. At the beginning of the dream, I was sitting in the center of a square in an old city, on the ground, sort of cross-legged, and a young man came into the square. He had long golden hair flying out behind. He sat down. It was nude to the waist, and we were sitting like this, facing each other in this square. And he told me the dream, and then I would interpret the dream. And as he told the dream, a rock would fall out of heaven, a great big boulder, and hit the dream. And the dream would split. Chunks would fly off the dream, and it revealed an inner structure that was made up entirely of nuts and bolts. And then another chunk would fly out of the sky, another boulder, and hit the dream, and the dream would, chunks would fly off of it. And more of this inner structure was revealed. It took the form of
kind of a modern piece of sculpturing or something like that. And then I went over and picked up a chunk that had been knocked off the dream, and it was made of bread. And I said to him, this demonstrates how a dream must be interpreted. You have to know what to discard. It's just like life. And the dream changed. And the youth and I now sat opposite each other, but on the banks of a river. And the dream no longer took the form of the nuts and bolts skeleton and the bread. It now took the form of a pyramid, which was made up, the sides of it made up of many, many colors. And each color was either a triangle or a cube. It was as if this pyramid, about 5 feet high, was shingled on all sides. And these colors kept changing, an incredible flux of color change. And I explained to him this was the way that a dream worked, that it compensated. As one color changed, then the other color had to change. As one energy went there, another energy had to go here. And this balancing was involved in what the dreams were about. Then, again, the dream changed. And the pyramid, which had been so beautiful with all the many colors, was now composed entirely of shit. And I looked at the pyramid of shit, and I looked up, and it was as if there was another pyramid on top, which I couldn't see. And the bottom pyramid came up like that, and it would form an apex, the top one being here, the bottom one like that. But this central area wasn't there. And I couldn't understand that. And I looked down, and as I looked down into the pyramid of shit, I realized the hand of God is in the shit. Those were the exact words that came to me. And then I knew why I couldn't see this invisible point, because that glowing white point was the face of God, and no one looks at the face of God and lives. It was as if, well, like a hole in a fence. You can't see the hole if you haven't got the fence. That what's visible makes the invisible visible. And then I woke up.
There's a great mystery in this dream. That character who's me in the dream is not me at all. He's got a wisdom I don't have. It's as if he were present at the conversation we had the night before regarding how to interpret a dream. And then he comes up with an answer.
Because this is such a vitally important question, the unconscious revealed him that beautiful dream, as if the self, as the sender of the dream, introduced him or itself to him and say, I am the maker of the dream, look what it is. And he first is in the square of a walled city. In Europe in old times, since Roman times, walled cities were always sketched according, laid out according to a cross in the middle, a square or a circle, and a cross in the middle in mandala form. And the original mythological idea behind it was always that the center represented the center of the world. You have that in the pattern of the town of Rome and of all Roman foundations, and later in most medieval towns you have the same layout. It is really a mandala, a world center. So he is in such a square place, so to speak, in the center of human life and human civilization, and there sits that dreamer, the young man who tells the dream, and that is a blonde young man, unknown young man, who looks very vital and full of vitality. We could compare him to a sun hero, because the blonde hair generally associates to solar qualities. He's the enlightened one and also the healthy one within him. We could even see in him already an aspect of the self of the personality, because ultimately the self is the dreamer, the sender of the dream, and the interpreter of the dream. And we are only the clown who watches it all, so to speak.
Isn't it amazing that we write it, we direct it, we produce it, and we're also the audience? The next section of the dream deals with intuition.
A large boulder falls from heaven and hits down. That probably has to be seen together with the fact that he asked himself, how does one interpret dream? interpreting dream is not an art one can do with one's own rational effort. One depends a bit on the help of the unconscious. One depends on hunches coming from the unconscious which hit the mark. The dream interpretation is to aim in the right way and hit the mark to what clicks in the dreamer. And that's why all sorts, very often when one discusses with people dreams, everybody brings another theory, and one has a feeling, yes, 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 it could mean that, it could mean that, till somebody says something where one says, that's it, now I feel that's it. Then the boulder has fallen from heaven. We don't make that. I always feel when I interpret dreams to people, if the unconscious doesn't give me the right hunch, I'm lost. I can stammer forever. But the unconscious, thank God, is very interested in the understanding of dream and generally helps one to hit the mark. But it is really an act of grace from heaven. And as soon as the interpretation hits the mark, or hits home, as we say, then it turns into bread of life. Whenever we understand a dream properly, we feel nourished. That is, so to speak, the supernatural nourishment we need, insight from the unconscious. That is very often represented in dreams as either the bread of life or the water of life, because it has to understand one's own dreams in the right way. When it hits the mark, one is vivified and nourished, and one has a kind of happy, vivified, satisfied feeling, like after having eaten a good meal. One feels, that's it, now I know from where to go, now I can go on. Something becomes peaceful and satisfied within one.
And the boulder's hitting.
When those boulders hit down, some of the substance flies away, the bread, and what remains are bolts and nuts, and they slowly build up a strange pyramid-like structures. So there is, so to speak, an outer form of the dream and a dream essence. And we can say, yes, the outer form of the dream is the sequence of images which we have to understand, which we have to follow up. But then, and that is the most difficult part of dream interpretation, we have to ask ourselves, now what is the essence of the dream message? What does the dream tell in a few words? What's the message? And then we have to kind of penetrate at the essence of the message, divine message, which is contained in that strange shell of sequence of absurd images, or difficult to understand images. This essence, as far as I have seen, always point to what I tried before to describe as the self. They always point to the inner center. They are like hundreds of forms all pointing to the inner center. Every dream is an attempt of nature to center us, to relate us again back to our innermost center, and by that, thus to stabilize our personality.
Will you elaborate on the nuts and bolts?
What remains as structures are bolts and nuts. The bolts could be looked as a masculine symbol and the nuts as a feminine symbol. In German, the nuts are called Mutter, mother. Therefore, it's a union of the masculine and feminine principle. It's a union of opposites, and bolts and nuts are there to connect, to make connections.
How does this relate to the central theme of dream interpretation?
We can say that every dream makes an essential connection between our ego consciousness and our inner center, a lasting connection. Everybody who has observed and watched his own dreams over years will have a series of dreams in mind of which he will inwardly say, that dream and what it meant I will never forget. One is forever linked with it, and through that dream one is linked with one's inner center.
It's always struck me as strange the way that the nuts and bolts changed into the pyramid in the dream.
and then the pyramid itself transformed. What's the meaning of the transformations?
This pyramid, which is first kind of like an abstract sculpture or an abstract iron structure even, then changes into a softer symbol, but that is the next part of the dream. Okay. The question first is that dream interpretation, it is explained to the dreamer, is to know what to discard and what to keep, like what like in life too. That is just really true, because the dream has a surface which one has to discard. For instance, dreams being pure nature have used sometimes very absurd or very bad taste similes. I remember, for instance, a painter, Analysand, who dreamt that he was taking a shit at the toilet, and he produced so much and much and much more that the toilet overflew, and couldn't keep it anymore. And then we found out what happened. The evening before, he had started a painting and had taken a too small canvas. And then a lot of more fantasies came, and he couldn't put them on the canvas anymore. And because he was a bit stingy, he didn't want to buy a bigger canvas. And the dream clearly commented, but you see, the dream does not follow the rules of our good education and ideas of good manners. It speaks a nature language, and the surface is sometimes very repellent or just stupid. People always say, tonight I had just an absurd, stupid dream. And that we have to discard the image, so to speak, and break through to the meaning. The image is not the important thing. The meaning, the message is the important thing, just as in life too, as is said.
At that point, the dream made a very fast transition. Suddenly the settings by a fast-flowing river. And the dream was no longer this structure of nuts and bolts and bread. It was now a pyramid. The pyramid would be maybe 5 feet high, 4-sided pyramid, and the sides of the pyramid, it was as if it was shingled. And the shingles were triangles and squares. And each shingle was illuminated with a light, a colored light that would glow. And the colors kept shifting. And as a color would shift here, another color would come on over here. So it was always balanced. And I said to him, this is how dreams compensate in the psyche. That as the energy shifts, more energy here, then it has to be compensated by less energy here. Then the dream changed again. The beautiful pyramid of many colors transformed into a pyramid of shit. And it was strange, because it was as if there was another pyramid on top of the base pyramid. It would go like this. And this central area here, where the two would cross, wasn't visible. There was nothing there. And it struck me as strange, because it was the only point that would keep the thing together. And as I looked into that point, that center little area, it started to glow. And it got more intense and more intense. And then I looked down, and it came to me a realization that the hand of God is in the ship. Those are the exact words.
It is as if the first part of the dream tried to explain to the dreamer what the dreams are in their essence and where they come from. And the second part of the dream tries to explain to the dreamer, how do dreams function within the flow of life, within the course of life. The river is also an image of time, of the flow of time. And that is naturally a question, not only what does this or that dream means, but what is the whole river of dream life we have every night? What is it? What's the meaning of it? Where does that come from? Well, what's the basic principle of its aliveness? And there, the structure of bolts and nuts changes into a pyramid shingled with thousands of quadrangles and triangles, colored triangles, and it is constantly alive and moving. Now the pyramid, that would be a symbol of what Jung calls the self, the innermost divine center of the psyche. It is like an image of the self for men and women, while women, if it's personified in men, it's more a wise old man, and if it's personified in a woman, it's generally more a wise old woman. When it's not personified, when it is what one would call a mandala, then it is beyond the differences of sex. It simply means the innermost center of the human psyche. And it is a pyramid which is built of 4 triangles. The Egyptian pyramids were built in this form, and the uppermost end, the point of the pyramid, was finished with such a 4th triangle stone, which finished the pyramid. And that uppermost stone was, we can't see that anymore because it's fallen off, but probably was covered with gold, and it was oriented in a way so that always it was first hit by the first ray of the rising sun.
Why were kings buried inside these enormous pyramidal structures?
The idea was that when the sun hits the point of the pyramid, this is the moment of the resurrection of the dead. The dead king who rests in the pyramid at that moment rises from his grave and goes up to the bark of the sun god and goes over the horizon. The pointed pyramid stone on top of the Egyptian pyramids was called Ben, and was a sacred stone, and was also connected with the word Benu, which is the word for phoenix, the symbol of resurrection. So it is always associated with that part of the dead person, because the pyramid is a grave, naturally, which survives death and resurrects and lives an eternal life in communion with the sun god. And when the rising sun hits this with its ray, light the stone, this is the moment where the dead person in its pharaoh in his grave is enlightened and rises from the dead and awakes again from the underworld.
The pyramid was a living organism. The changes were fluid and organic. They were unpredictable.
The dream stresses that all these many shingles which make triangular and quadrangular shingles which make up the pyramid are colored in 1,000 forms of colored nuances, and that whenever on one side of the pyramid one color nuances changes because it's in constant changing life, then on the other parts another color must be changed, so that there is always a kind of fluid equilibrium preserved throughout the whole pyramid. That is one thing we observe is a function of what Jung calls the self. The self, this innermost regulating center of our psychological system, seems to aim at keeping the whole psychological system in a fluid balance. That has to do with what we call the law of compensation. Whenever we take on in consciousness a lopsided attitude, too rational or too spiritual or too materialistic or too driven by a single drive or too ambitious or whatever you like, if we exaggerate one aspect of our personality, then the dreams compensate by bringing up that which outweighs it to the other side. That's why St. Augustine, after his conversion to highest spirituality, said, "Thank God I'm not responsible for my dreams." He must have had some who pulled him right down, but he never tells us. The law of compensation seems to aim not as mechanically compensate. If I try to be good, my dreams are bad, or if I try to be too cheerful, my dreams are melancholy. Or it's not a mechanical bringing in the opposite. It is a compensation in view of a totality. As if to say, you are lopsided, not in itself, but you are lopsided compared to your inner totality. That's what seems to be the essential wisdom of the dream, to to preserve a balance of all thinkable psychic opposites and establish a kind of middle way or middle line. The unconscious seems to be very much in favor of the Chinese yin-yang philosophy, or this idea of the Tao being a subtle balance of opposites. Or rather, naturally, the yin-yang philosophy of the Chinese is based on revelations of the unconscious, or on studying the function of the unconscious.
It was a strange experience looking into the apex of that pyramid. There should have been a structure there, and there wasn't. There was only light.
Just as in the real Egyptian pyramid, the uppermost point is the most numinous, important part of the whole structure, so it is in this dream pyramid. The upper point is empty space, is something invisible, but which is at the same time radiating a light. One is naturally reminded of the Buddhist teaching of nirvana being the uttermost point of emptiness, of the self being not an empty emptiness, but an emptiness full of life, but having no specific delineable content, and being the source of inner enlightenment. I think now that Zen Buddhism and many other Eastern meditation techniques have so widespread, it is not necessary to comment much more on this. It is that thing which the Easterners are striving for in all their meditation exercises and techniques. They are, so to speak, aiming at realizing that point of the pyramid. It is a form of the representation of the highest value in the psyche, or the Godhead, or the inner Buddha, or whatever. The different schools give it different names, but it is always that same inner thing.
Would you interpret the final image when the pyramid turns to shit?
Now the pyramid consists of solid shit. There we have again a union of extreme opposites, the divine, the most sublime divine light, and the shit, and what it means, the most transient, valueless thing which we discard, which we get rid of, which we cannot digest, the thrown away stuff. One is reminded of the fact that the alchemists always said that the gold is found in the shit, the highest is found in the lowest, and in certain Eastern schools of meditation, it has been pointed out that after having reached illumination, one returns to the very ordinary life. And the very ordinary life is also part of one's illuminated life. There is no contrast between having an inner illumination and living the shitty life of every day. Even those opposites belong together. But what the light does is that it makes the hand of God visible in the shit. I think one can just leave that and say that's it. That's the essence of the dream. And if we see the hand of God in the shit, then we can stand the shit. Otherwise we suffocate in it. And that's the message of the dream pyramid.
He dreamt he was a butterfly. And now he's puzzling all the time, is he a man who dreamt he was a butterfly? Or is he a butterfly who dreamt he was a man? Are we the dream of the self, or is the self our dream?
It is so important in our culture that we recognize that our seedbed is power. And however we may try to disguise that, if we are honest, we have to come back to that point. Work in our journals, recognize when we were helping somebody or when we were making certain plans, we had another agenda. The unconscious picks up that other agenda, and it interferes with the relationship. Just to demonstrate how infiltrated we are with this, turn on the soap operas in the afternoon, and you'll hear some whining beauty or some whining little girl saying, "Oh, I love you so much, darling. I love you. I love you. You will do what I want you to do, won't you, darling?" And I just wish that some man would say, "No, I won't." It might wake the both of them up. Because that is coming from power. It's contemptible that two adult people can fall for that kind of relationship. But it is the shadow of power in both people. Another way of checking that out is through projections. You can find in your dreams how you project onto others. For example, you may say, of all the people in the world I do not like, why does she appear in my dreams? Over and over, there she is, and I can't stand her. Crucial that you look at yourself and your behavior and claim that projection and say, yes, that is how I can act. I ask your friends who will tell you the truth. Some friends don't tell you the truth. That also can be power. But you need to know that you are putting energy out into other people that is yours. And it's not only your worst, it's your best. So that you pull that back and you recognize power, or whatever it happens to be. If it is the best side, you may be projecting your capacity to write, your capacity to sing. Whatever that divine contrasexual in you is, you are projecting, and you're putting a terrible load onto the person you're projecting onto. He isn't a god. You are not a goddess. And, you know, I've had men say to me, I give her beautiful gifts, and she looks at me, she never says anything, she says, thank you very much. But I know I have just missed somewhere, and I don't understand it. What he's not understanding is that she has projected a God onto him. He's perfection. And he's not living up to that perfection that she is projecting, nor is she taking the responsibility of relating to that inner God and freeing up the relationship that two human beings can truly love each other, not through the miasma of the projections, but as they are, human beings. It's to come to the end of life and recognize that you were able to hold the divinity and the relationship to the divinity in its both its demonic and its creative forms, and to recognize that you've had a wonderful human relationship, that you have remained in your own body. You have lived your muscles and your own breath, and being a part of that reality. See, otherwise, if you get into that divinity and it turns on you, which it's bound to do, then you start yearning for that demon lover. And that demon lover will lure you out of life. And that will fit right in with your projection onto Daddy. Either he was so perfect that you couldn't live up to it, he was God, or it went in the demonic side and you did everything to escape it and you ran straight into it. Yes, it's painful. Von Franz says that we have spent years in the liberation of sexuality, and now the next 50 years are about the liberation of the heart. That's where we are. The anguish is immense because religions don't want to recognize the differences. Nationalities are different in their values. To live your own truth is not easy. But that's the direction that we are going. And we can see at the end of the line that having walked through that shit, we can also see the hand of God. I'd like to suggest one way in which the soul, the self, soul and spirit combined in the divine marriage is the self. How the self manifests. And I'd like to recite a short poem by a Chinese philosopher. I dreamt I was a butterfly, and now I think, was I a man dreaming I was a butterfly? Or was I a butterfly dreaming I was a man? We can't know. That is the mystery. As we circle this center and hold the mystery, an amazing thing happens. Now you, in your living room, have been able to watch a couple of programs, maybe 4 programs in the evening or whatever. But I suggest that sometime you immerse yourself in the material. For 10 hours a day. And watch what happens to your body. You may find a totally new energy emerging. We used to find that when we showed the whole series in one weekend. People who were exhausted when they arrived on Friday night were fully energized by Sunday, because the self-energy is released. You hold that place at center. If someone like von Franz, for example, can hold that space, let the whole outside world fall apart. Everything that is superfluous leaves. And you stay with that center. She's like a tuning fork that brings everyone else into that center. And they can relax into that place and feel their own soul emerging. The eternal is quiet at the center of the transitory. As T.S. Eliot puts it, except for the point, the still point, there would be no dance, and there is only the dance. I'd like to give you a poem about the divine marriage. Rilke's poem. This is the creature there has never been. They never knew it. Nonetheless, they loved the way it moved, its suppleness, its neck, its gaze, mild and serene. Not there, because they loved it, it behaved as if it were. They always left some space, and in that clear, unbroken space they saved, it gently reared its head with scarce a trace of not being there. They fed it, not with corn, but only with the possibility of being. And that was able to confer such strength. Its brow put forth a horn, one horn. Whitely it stole up to the maid, to be within the silver mirror and in her. Enjoy your dreams.